The first panelist we're going to speak to today is Humphrey Hawksley, BBC foreign correspondent. Humphrey, hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Humphrey,
thanks for asking me.
It's so wonderful to have you. The reason I'd like to open with you is really for us to benefit from your eyewitness accounts. You've been working on this story for a matter of decades, actually. It's more than 20 years when I look back at the cuttings. Could you actually just begin by telling us how you came to this story?
Yeah, I was in Ghana doing a story on something called Trocosi, which was in fact a sort of cult domestic violence slavery thing that was going on. But we went to an NGO place there to film there, and the guy there, the aid worker, said, well, if you really want to do a story about slavery, you should talk to this guy. And this guy had been rescued from a plantation in the Ivory Coast and had ended up in Ghana. He was about 12, 13 or something. And that began, I thought, well, this is fascinating because this is a multinational corporation story. I didn't know at that time that Ivory Coast produced 40% of the world's cocoa and all the rest of it. So I went back and we cut the Ghana stories. I said to the editor of the program I was working on, I said, oh, we need to go back and do this story. And he said, but Humphrey, you've just done a slave story. We can't keep doing slave stories. I said, no, this is different. This is supply chain. This is the big companies and all the rest of it. So we went back, I think it was in early 2001. And we did a journey from Bamako in Mali right through to Abidjan in the Ivory Coast and through that cocoa plantation belt. They call them plantations, but it's just sort of scrubland with that. And we heard the stories and we met the children, how they were lured into what they thought was a soccer team. And then the next thing they were in a cage. And when they tried to escape, their feet were beaten with planks of wood with nails in them, and they were handcuffed up like this, and they couldn't sleep and all the rest of it. And I just thought I couldn't get my head around it. I thought, this is going, and we ended up in San Pedro in the Ivory Coast, and we saw these huge container ships with the cocoa going into it and heading off to Rotterdam with Cargill and Cadbury's and all those things. And then I got back to London, and I started calling up the chocolate companies, expecting to be able to say, look, there's this issue with children's slavery. What are you doing about it? It's not happening. They said, it's not how. It says, you're lying. And I said, but I've seen it. He said, no, we've carried out a desk survey and we know that it's not happening. And then the next thing I knew as I was putting this together is that letters were arriving to BBC editors and the Director General saying that Humphrey Hawksley was a political activist and had a vested interest, and the Ivory Coast embassy was writing in and all the rest of it. And I remember I looked up just before we came on here, the online story that I did then, and I said, the last paragraph was the multinationals who make their living out of selling chocolate and coffee around the world haven't contributed anything to the campaign here to stop the slavery trade taking place. A few weeks later, and that story went out, but it didn't do much. But then a few weeks later, there was an old tramp steamer called the MV Eterino that was found or was arrested off the West African coast, off Benin, I think. And it apparently had child slaves in it heading for West Africa. And for some reason, this caught the public's imagination. And we had all those pictures from my trip. So we did a big news piece on this. I think at the end of the day, it didn't have child slaves on it, but that became irrelevant. That kicked it up. And in Britain, of course, nothing happened because the British don't do morality and human rights and that sort of thing. But in America, it really did trigger off something, and it ended up at the end of that year with Senator Tom Harkin and Congressman Eliot Engel forcing through what was called the Harkin-Engel Protocol, and they told the chocolate companies that they had to either do it themselves through this protocol or they would legislate for it. We're now talking about the end of 2001 here, and they had promised to get rid of the worst forms of child labor by 2005. I went back in 2006. I thought, why don't we go back and see how there's no more child slavery? I didn't really sort of keep track of it that much. And we did a big trip again. And I said to the Ivory Coast government, I think the chocolate industry, they didn't let you talk to the individual companies. You couldn't talk to Mars or Hershey or Cadbury. You had to talk to the Chocolate Confederation or something like that. And they had set up the Coco something association, which was meant to be getting millions of dollars to do all this. And I said to them, I said, take me to your pilot project. Take me to the best thing that you've done in these 5 years to eradicate the worst forms of child labor. So we got into this whole thing and jumped through the thing, and I've still got the picture. If you can see this, this is the village that we went to. Now, I got to say, I had expected to have sort of paved roads and whitewashed walls and all the rest of it. I knew it would be a Potemkin type of thing, but I expected that. That's what we came to. And this building here, if you can sort of make that out in the light, that was the school. And inside the school, there were children aged from about 4 to 14, with the scars of the cocoa trade, cuts to their ankles, malnourished noses, you know, that, terrified. And the guy said, this is our pilot project. And I said, are you sure? Because we've got the Cocoa Something Association with millions of dollars, and they had built this with their own hands. Nobody had come in and built it. Maybe they got a, you know, $10 or $20 to put the thatch on the roof. I don't know. It wasn't clear. But what struck me from that is that the cocoa industry didn't care. They had no intention of doing it. And I actually, later when I went back again in 2011, I'd had lunch with somebody from the cocoa industry. It was an off-the-record lunch, and I'll keep it like that because they might not respect what they say, but I do. But I said, what happens in your company when something like the Harkin-Engel protocol crosses the desk? And he says, well, we look at it and then we see what we can do, and then we usually throw it in the bin. That's what he said to me. I went back again in 2011. And from between 2006 and 2011, I did lots of other supply chain stories in India and Latin America with conflict minerals and cotton and all the rest of it, similar sort of stuff. But I went back in 2011, so we're now 10 years since I did it. And I mean, I'm not a politician, I'm not an activist, which is why I didn't tick the thing on the poll just now. I'm a reporter. So I go and report what I see. So I wasn't going to go and look for that one child that was working on one place just to prove my, I was looking at the situation as a whole, and it hadn't changed. We still found more of them with pesticides and machetes, and they're not going to school. You go on a Tuesday, the child's meant to be in school. He's not at school, he's on the plantation. His mother's hundreds of miles away. He's got fear in his eyes and all the rest of it. And we did that story. And then got a call from Nestle. And Nestle says, child labor has no place in the, my screen's gone. Has your screen gone out?
No, we can see you.
That's it. I'll just say, a Nestle executive from Switzerland, where they're based, said, no, this has got to change. Child labor has no place in our supply chains. And I said, yeah, but you said that 10 years ago. He says, no, we're going to work with the something, yet another NGO that they'd, I don't know what had happened to the Cocoa Something Association, and that they were going to fix it. And they didn't fix it. And it was during that sort of thing that I realized this could drive you mad. You're going round and round in circles, and it's not being fixed. And
well, it wasn't less easy to wander about on a plantation and find children working. You know, in terms of your role as a reporter, it hadn't become more difficult.
No. I mean, if you look at the websites of the foundations and that and that, all of that looks wonderful. But when we got into, in 2011, when we got into the car and I mean, there are things is that the level of poverty hadn't changed at all. These were dirt poor people. The roads that go to these plantations, they're not plantations, they're a sort of patch of land with a cocoa thing on. They still had the potholes and that, so you couldn't navigate through them. And that's an interesting thing, because that left the only thing that could get through were flatbed Kia trucks. Those flatbed Kia trucks belonged to what they call the middlemen. who could then set the price because the farmers couldn't get to market. And all this was a sort of deliberate ploy. And we went to, I asked UNDP, I said, can you do a back of the envelope thing of how much it would cost the chocolate industry to make those roads work? And it was a minuscule amount. It was like 0.5% of their total income could actually pave the cocoa belt so that people could get to, but it wasn't being done. And I think one of the takeaways that I've got,
government as well, haven't you, Humphrey? You've approached the Ivory Coast government about it.
You mean the Ivory Coast government? And
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's the thing. You've got the huge corruption in the government, and you've got the big the multinationals working with a corrupt government that they know is corrupt. And they say we have to comply with the government regulations, but they know that that government is actually in their pay, because in the Ivory Coast, for example, it's 40% of the stuff. But I think, Lise, my sort of takeaway now, 20 years later from all this, is that we were going there when democracy and the free market was the sort of beacon that we were spreading all around the world. It might have gone pear-shaped in Iraq, but at that time, everybody sort of lapped it up. And the canny dictator that ran Ivory Coast before all this happened, I mean, he was a complete, he built the biggest basilica in the world after St. Peter's and that sort of thing.
Quickly jump in just 1 second. We're going to need to wind on to the next panelist in a second.
I should have mentioned that Gavin's going to try and keep us to time, actually. Sorry, everyone. But you were talking about the largest basilica in the Ivory Coast.
Yeah, I'm just saying that he was a dictator, but he knew the glue that held his country together. And he made sure that the cocoa farmers were given a minimum income so that they didn't starve. When the Chicago Business School and London Business School and the ideologues from the West came in, that went away. And that is what produced the child slavery and what produced this nexus of the multinationals and the government and us buying the chocolate. And that, I think we'll hear from Terry and others, is what is still going on today and going up to the US Supreme Court to get it right.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for that introduction, Humphrey. That really, really helps. I know Terrence is chomping at the bit to jump in. And in fact, actually, Humphrey, I think that you'll probably have insights you'd like to contribute while Terrence is speaking, because this is all sounding a bit familiar, I have to say. Terrence, where to start? Because you began in the 90s, I think. Shall we start there? We actually... There's a lot to discuss. We could spend the entire 2 hours talking about legal points, actually. But shall we just begin pre-Harkenangle and how we got to where we are in terms of that regulation?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Humphrey. It's amazing how our paths were parallel but never directly crossed. But we started doing our research in the late 1990s, and I was working with an insane photographer, Robin Romano, who's now deceased, but he collected a bunch of pictures and we collected a bunch of data, and we were one of the groups that presented these materials to the Congress, to Eliot Engel in particular, who before the Harkenangle Protocol actually got passed by a tremendous majority in the Congress, a bill to actually ban the importation of chocolate made with child labor.
In a flash, I mean, I think that's worth pausing and reflecting on. The fact is that who's going to vote against protecting children from slavery? Any children anywhere from slavery. So yeah, let's just pause for a minute and remember that that passed in the House in a flash. And yet somehow, sorry, Terry, I interrupted. We are now in a situation where
so we caught the industry somewhat by surprise in the House, and then in our system, the bill goes over to the Senate and has to pass the Senate. By then, the cocoa industry was on red alert. The Chocolate Manufacturers Association, the World Cocoa Foundation, they hired the best lobbyists money can buy, including Robert Dole and a few other big names like that. And what emerged from the Senate discussion was the Harkenangle Protocol, a voluntary initiative. Now, Engels was not happy with this. Tom Harkin was on my board of directors, and I was disgusted by what happened. and the fact that Harkin was taking money from Cargill, one of the worst offenders out there. But they came up with this protocol, and instead of having a mandatory law, they gave themselves, as Humphrey said, until 2005 to end child labor. And they admitted they used child labor. The protocol admits that there's the worst forms of child labor in violation of Convention 182. So they committed to ending it. Very much like Humphrey, I said, well, no one's going to believe me if I just say it's nonsense. I'm going to watch my language today. I get carried away. So I guess we have to wait and see till 2005. So I too returned in 2005, took a bunch of pictures, and it was exactly the same as Humphrey said. It was worse, in fact, because Coco was booming and the civil conflict was over. And I was shocked that I saw no evidence of any program whatsoever. So they then gave themselves a unilateral extension of time, something they've now done 4 times. And currently their deadline they've given themselves is to reduce by 70% their use of child labor by the year 2025. So if you think about it, this is evil genius. They admit they're doing it, and they've given themselves legal permission, in a sense, to continue to do it until they get around to stopping. And in the meantime, they must be making millions from the cheap cocoa, because they're spending millions of dollars to defend the lawsuits I brought against them. They're spending millions of dollars on lobbyists and PR firms to lie about what they're doing so they can continue doing it. So it must be quite profitable to use child slaves to harvest your cocoa. So what we did in 2005, I came back and armed with my new evidence. They gave themselves an extension of time, and we sued them. I said, they're not going to ever do this. So we brought a claim on behalf of 6 children that I met who had been trafficked from Mali exactly in the ways Humphrey described, and were forced then to work as slaves to harvest cocoa. When one of them tried to escape, they cut the bottom of his feet with a machete and put pepper in it. He still has those scars. So we sued on behalf of these 6 kids, Nestle, Cargill, and Archer Daniels Midland, at the time, the 3 really big players there. And unfortunately, they hired the biggest law firms in the world, and they've created every delay tactic that you can imagine. And this case was just argued 15 years later on December 1st, 2020 in our US Supreme Court. Now get this, these companies that have promised to end child labor and claim that they abhor it, that's the word they keep using, their lawyer, the famous Neil Kochel, who sold his soul to represent these cocoa companies in the Supreme Court, he stood up and said that corporations are immune from international human rights violations, including child slavery. He argued that. And even the most right-wing justices we have, like Thomas and Alito, they were shocked. I mean, they had a problem with the fact that if you form a corporation, if individuals are using slaves, and that's wrong, but if they form a corporation, they're immunized. That's a crazy notion. But we won't get a decision.
Wait, I need to stop you. You're telling me that in the Supreme Court just last December, Cargill and Nestle did not deny that they used child labor.
Well, they can't deny it, but they don't admit it so openly. They say they abhor it and so on, but
But they're not defending themselves on the basis of the fact that it doesn't happen.
Exactly. And they can't, we'll eat them alive. The facts are the facts. They cannot deny the evidence, the pictures, the testimonials. And we, of course, at every chance we got, reminded the court that today they're using child slaves still. So that case, we'll see what the Supreme Court does. But if they rule against us on that, not only will Nestle and Cargill and the others never stop, but imagine what the implications in other areas too. The corporate supply chain people will do high fives and cancel their corporate social responsibility departments and just have a field day. Now, I do have to just quickly say, I know I will have time limits. Go ahead, you were going to say something.
It's just because I want to make sure that we do have time for you to mention that you did settle with one of those 3 companies. And this is, we should remind everyone, there is a second court action in play right now as well. We're still talking about the first. So there was just a little ray of good news that came out of that, and I really enjoy hearing about that.
Yes, absolutely. So in about 2016, so 5 years or so ago, Archer Daniels Midland, ADM, sold their cocoa business to Cargill. And then they approached us and said, look, we're out of the cocoa business, so we'd like to be out of the lawsuit business as well. So we settled our claims against ADM, and it's an undisclosed amount, but it was a fortune to these 6 Malian former slaves. And I had the great pleasure of going back to Mali and meeting them and telling them the good news. We helped them set up bank accounts, and they had to get IDs, and they were so happy. It was unbelievable. I went back in 2019 to continue my research, and I saw them all again, and I heard all of their stories of they each bought land and built a house. Their kids are in school. They've become activists on the issue, and they're communicating to others. Don't believe it when they tell you there's a good job waiting for you in Cote d'Ivoire. And so that little glimmer of happiness and hope emerged from this horrible story. And I hope that with my other cases, we're able to tell similar stories of a larger group of people, and more important, to create financial penalties that are so severe that these companies will decide that it's in their economic interest to just stop using child slaves.
I think the other point that I wanted to raise with you, Terry, is the fact that if you believe the PR, if you believe the gump that's issued to us, this is all a great big, complicated misunderstanding. And that's just absolutely not the case. I think in terms of what we hear from you, what we hear from Humphrey, this is quite deliberate. This is a quite sort of proactively arranged structure, and child slavery is basically built into the business model. Please interrupt me if that's wrong, but that's certainly the impression I get from everybody on this at this event, actually. So it strikes me that the 7 companies who are named in your current class action could actually get together and could decide to simply pay a living wage, which makes it unnecessary to use child slaves in order to produce. And sorry, the other thing that we should touch on, Terry, is that we should this is a lot of cocoa. I mean, this is 70% of the world's cocoa being produced under these circumstances, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Just quickly,
I absolutely.
Terrence, sorry, if you're able to just wrap this one up fairly soon. Sorry, I've got to keep us on track, and we need to move on to the next panelist in a minute or so.
Sure. Thank you. Yes, I absolutely agree with what you said, Lise, that this is just a question of you have to make them do it. They've shown that they won't do it voluntarily, and we hope that our case will do it. I would also like people to know that if you go on our website, iradvocates.org, we have a copy of this new complaint we filed on February 12, 2021, just now, against the 7 big cocoa companies. And part of what we do in the complaint is try to educate the public. We show the contrast between what the companies claim on their websites and the reality on the ground, which is nothing has changed on the ground. I was just there in November 2019, the last time we could safely visit, and I saw no change at all and took more pictures of more child slaves. Thank you.
I will add, actually, everybody who's joined us has had a note which includes a link to the story that we wrote when we interviewed you about this. And that story includes the link to that class action as lodged with the court. And it's really compelling reading. I recommend it to everybody who's with us today to make sure that they click on those links and get to that paperwork. It's
great. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm turning next to Paul Schoenmakers. Paul, is that how I pronounce your name? My Dutch is non-existent. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, so you can just call me Paul. It's a Dutch surname indeed, Schoenmakers, but Paul is fine. Yeah.
I would never destroy your language by even attempting that. I'm so sorry. So Paul, you're with Tony's Chocolonely. You're here with us. I mean, I'm going to get you to talk a little bit more, but I have to say from the outset, there's a lot of people who have joined us in the audience who are ethical chocolate makers. And obviously I appreciate everything that all of them do. I think the thing that stands out in terms of, you know, Tony's proposition, not just for me, but for Anne, who's with us as well, is the fact that, you know, I think you guys are the only people who put the word slavery on every single bar that goes out there in the market. And I think that that's a very brave thing that you have done. Can you just give us a little bit of an introduction as to how the company was founded? Because I think it began when some Dutch journalists actually did something very similar to Humphrey, and, you know, found themselves covering that story and was surprised that nobody seemed to be talking about this.
Yeah. No, thanks. And it is indeed quite similar to what Humphrey said. In 2005, a group of Dutch journalists actually stumbled upon this small article on page 8 of the newspaper that told about the occurrence of child slavery in the cocoa supply chain. And they were so appalled by that. And they figured out, how can we bring that to like page 1, on the front page of the newspaper. And the three of them, they were working on a television program, actually, which is similar to Food on Wrap. What they do is they look at consumer products, and then they read all the marketing messages, and then they call up the consumer help desk and ask, you know, what's behind that marketing message. So and for all kind of products. So what they did, they started calling up these chocolate companies. They found out that they had signed this Wageningen protocol that Terry talked about in 2001 already. And now 4 years down the line, they wanted to know what is the current status and what have you done to eradicate that. And they actually found out that they had quite some difficulties getting them on the phone. You can imagine that when you're making a television show, that is problematic, right? Because the whole idea is to get them on the phone and get them talking. So they thought of something else. One of them, who's called Teun, also a Dutch name, and international you would translate it to Tony, thought of, I know of all these wrongs in cocoa, and still I, as a consumer, buy chocolate and I eat it. So that makes me actually a complicit to those chocolate crimes. So he reasoned that eating chocolate made him a chocolate criminal. And he decided to start a court case against himself to raise attention to this big problem in cocoa. And also, he figured, like Terry told, that if they would start a court case against the big chocolate companies, they would be overwhelmed by these high-paid lawyers, and they would never make it. But starting a court case against himself was therefore an even better idea, because if Teun would have found to be guilty, then actually all consumers of chocolate would be guilty of the crimes that are at the basis of the cocoa trade. So that's what they did, and they filmed that series, of course, and then fast forward. The judge ruled that even though he had great sympathy, or she had great sympathy for his cause, that there was no direct link between him eating chocolate and the atrocities that the victims that even testified against him talked about. So then, as a next step, because they didn't want to let it go, they decided to start their own chocolate company as a means to create more awareness, and also as a means to show that this doesn't need to be the way chocolate is or cocoa is produced. It has to. We have to do it differently. Nobody needs chocolate for their diet, right? It's a gift that you give to yourself or to someone else. So it should absolutely be without illegal child labor or modern slavery. So that's what they did. In 2005, they launched the first Tony's Chocolonely bar in an alarmingly red wrapper. Oh, sorry.
Paul, can I just ask quickly, did you have, or you might not be able to answer this, but was there ever any difficulty in terms of raising money from investors? Did they look at this brand proposition, which was to put the word slavery on every single bar of chocolate, and say, that's not how you sell chocolate. You sell chocolate because it tastes great
Yeah.
because we sell chocolate with sex because it's supposed to be this feel-good thing. Were any eyebrows raised when it came to raising finance?
But that's a brilliance of that we sort of started as a spin-off of this group of journalists as a means to create awareness. So we are an impact company, we say, that makes chocolate, not the other way around. And from the beginning, we've launched Tony's in an alarmingly red wrapper to raise attention and awareness about these issues. It's called Tony's Chocolonely because he felt he was fighting a lonely battle against the big chocolate companies, just like Humphrey and Terrence have been fighting that lonely battle, and we'll be hearing later. And at the front of that package, we had to talk about that growth issue. And later on,
to ask you then about, we know that Anne's going to come on soon and talk about her slave-free chocolate list, and the fact that because you guys are using Barry Callebaut as a supplier, you're not on that list this year, although I know that you were on the list for a long time before. So talk to us about the monitoring process that Tony's uses.
Yes, thanks. So a bit fast forward after the
Sorry,
history.
I'm really speeding you along here.
No, that's great. So in 2012, the journalists realized that just buying fair trade chocolate is not enough. It wasn't helping the problem, and effectively they found out that the chocolate was coming from all over the place. So we decided to set up our own traceable supply chain. So back then in 2012, everybody laughed at us. They said, that's not possible. You want to buy cocoa from Ivory Coast and Ghana, the two biggest producers of the commodity. Traceability doesn't exist. And we proved them wrong. We set up our own traceable supply chain. So every node in the chain now enters information. So with that, we've added an extra flow to the traditional commodity flow that just has goods going this way and funds going the other way. We add a third flow of information to that supply chain, and with that we have a full traceability from bean to bar. So for all the chocolate that we sell, we know for 100% that it comes from the 7 partner cooperatives that we work with now in Ivory Coast and Ghana. And even though we work with Barry Callebaut to produce the chocolate itself, we've made sure that the way they produce it, it's totally segregated and separated from their other business and the cocoa that they source themselves. So in that sense, we can make sure that all the chocolate that we sell, we can take full responsibility of what is going on in the supply chain, and we can have that traceability all the way back to the cooperatives and the farmers.
Okay, I'm sure that in a few minutes we'll have time for more discussion and more questions, and I think that there are people with us in the audience who will question how it's possible to monitor the beans. We'll get to that. Can you talk to me about the petitioning? So basically, Tony's is still, although you're a chocolate company, and now in the UK, because of some recent funding, you're very, very everywhere. I mean, you're in every single mainstream supermarket now. So Tony's has come a long way, but you're still campaigning, you're still running petitions and that sort of thing. So what's going on that front?
Yeah, so absolutely. So we've grown to an international company now. 15 years later, we're selling in around 40 countries with focus on the Netherlands, UK, the US, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. But our mission has never changed, right? Our mission is to change the norm in chocolate and make 100% slave-free the norm. And for that, we have a very simple roadmap of just 3 pillars, and that starts with creating awareness, so the consumers know what's going on in cocoa and what they can do to change it. 2 is lead by example. So we've developed this new way of doing business that doesn't exploit farmers, that can serve as an example for the entire industry actually to change the way they work. And 3, we can't do this alone. It's not just about our chocolate that needs to be in order, but we have to change the norm in the entire sector. So the 3rd pillar is inspired to act. But definitely, our activism is still the fore and center of of the organization. Raising awareness is key to building pressure on big chocolate companies to change. So with consumer awareness, we can leverage that pressure. And in addition to that, we've been campaigning for quite a while now for additional legislation that really holds companies accountable. So next to some of the legislation that exists in the US, there's very little around that really holds companies accountable. So we started a petition where now more than 60,000 consumers also support us in our ask for thorough due diligence legislation that not only provides information and transparency, but also holds companies accountable and liable for the human rights violations in their chain.
Okay, brilliant.
And
And
we need
when
to move on, Lise, we're going to have to move on to the next panelist in a moment. Sorry, I've got my little time here.
The last question, Lise.
no, I think that's it, isn't it? I have to move on. So we'll have to come back to Paul.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. Anne, hi, thank you so much for joining us. Anne, and the slave-free chocolate label, how long have you been doing this and why?
Okay, I've been doing this for 16 years now, and why is a very quick, simple story. When I found out that our chocolate was really, that there was, illegal child labor and international trafficking in the chocolate industry, I also found out that really about 8 different big companies were not only complicit, that they had promised to take care of this. And then when I was doing some research on it, I found out in the US, I'm speaking, for the people in the US, any interest, any outrage from what happened in 2001 by 2006 had 100% completely waned. So I thought, wow, what are we going to do about this? There's no group for me to donate to. There's no group for me to join. So I could either shrug my shoulders and get on with my day, or I could take a stand. So I decided to take a stand, and I believe that that's what I should have done. So that's how it all got started.
But I mean, we haven't mentioned this, but fair trade obviously wasn't good enough for you. The Rainforest Alliance wasn't good enough for you. They're funded really, really well. So, why did we need a slave-free chocolate label as well?
Well, I don't consider that, we're not a labeling system. We're just an activism group. Okay. Yeah. We're not trying to label anything per se. And no, when Rainforest or when fair trade came onto the scene, I saw right away, I thought, well, this is a good ideal, right? But we're talking about 1.5 million children that aren't going to school, that are trafficked, that don't get medical care where they, get their feet cut. How is fair trade going to be able to remedy this problem? They're not. I think fair trade and certification programs, if they're done independently from the companies, is what needs to go forward after Big Coco has come to the table and fulfill the promises that they made, not only to the world, but to these exploited children.
Okay. Talk to us about Tony's. They didn't make the cut this year.
No, they didn't make the cut this year. And Slave-Free Chocolate is not a marketing firm. We are not here to promote or not promote any particular company. My aim is to create a large community of partners. These partners are ethical chocolate companies, individuals, organizations, because when you have a large community, you have more energy, more focus, and more probability that change can actually happen. Slave-free chocolate or Anrig's alone is not going to solve this problem. Tony's Chocolonely alone is not going to solve this problem. And all of this also depends on Big Coco coming to the table. Tony's was taken off because their continued partnership with Barry Callebaut doesn't meet the standards that I'm asking from others on the list. And I'm actually asking a lot from them. We question why Tony's continues to rely on Barry Callebaut, a company that all agree has serious child labor issues in its supply chain, and whether Tony's business model can really be considered ethical and sustainable if it's dependent on the economies of scale and pricing policies Barry Callebaut offers of this continued reliance labor. Tony's was first put on the list when I started all this, because really in 2006, it was before the big bean and bar market push. There were really only 6 companies on this. It was Tony's, Equal Exchange, Theo, Divine, and Ashkenazi. And I knew that Tony's was getting their having Barry Callebaut make their chocolate, but they also were doing a lot of activism work. So I thought, okay, well, this balances that out. But they also said that we're going to change Barry Callebaut from within. And 16 years, what I've seen, not just from Tony's, but there hasn't, all the initiatives to date hasn't been able to dent the increasing number of, children exploited on in the chocolate industry. So I think that, going forward, I need to keep my standards to strictly ethical chocolate companies to keep it an even playing field. And I also don't want to see a separate economy that's growing. We have a slave-free economy and everybody's jumping on, slave-free kind of things, right? Well, that makes an individual consumer feel good about what they're doing. But in reality, nothing's changing in the industry. So slave-free chocolate needs.
Yeah, I think I remember you mentioning that you were getting a bit of pressure as well from other people on the list because there's a price disparity. So if you choose to buy cocoa from certain parts of East Africa, that allows you to sell at a certain price on the supermarket shelf versus, say, using Mexico, Ecuador. We have people from Ecuador today and so on. So you had people saying, well, that's not really fair. We're having to charge so much more.
Right, we're making our own chocolate from bean to bar, soup to nuts, and that's different than if you have a big player make your chocolate for you or a complicit player make your chocolate for you. And I don't want to see the slave-free chocolate ethical artisan bars start to think, wow, we can survive and we can do really well promoting our slave-free product because more awareness is coming through. Maybe I can see, have Cargill make my, bars for me. I'll have this make my bars for me. And they go back to the list and, well, Tony's has Barry Callebaut making their bars. Why can't I be on the list too? Mm-hmm. So no, this is, I'm not here, like I'm not a marketing firm. I'm not here to grow green industry. I'm here to.
You're not making a penny from this as well. This is a purely activist.
Absolutely. If I was making a penny for this, then I would be profiting on the backs of children as well. Yes.
Yeah. I know that you've actually done a little bit of work in supporting Terry's current class action as well, in terms of pulling together amicus briefs from ethical chocolate companies about that price disparity.
Yeah, well, that's true. And I'm very passionate about Terry's work because really nothing happens in the United States without legislation, okay, or without litigation. Nothing happens. So his lawsuits are probably like the biggest thing that we have right now. Mm-hmm. Also, slave-free chocolate, like until we get the big cocoa companies to sit around the table and hammer this out together, okay? Barry Callebaut can't be first and do this because then the other one, they won't be competitive. They'll be priced themselves out of the marketplace.
Terry says he's being very even-handed. He's suing them all.
He's suing them all. He's suing them all.
At the upper hand, right?
Right. Well, it doesn't work Terry knows that if he just sues, say, Cargill, right? And then Cargill tries to get their act together, it won't work because eventually when we're talking about those farmers living in abject poverty, the beans kind of all get mixed together. One can't go. They all have to go, right? They all promised it and they all have to go.
Yeah. And in terms of the monitoring, I think you've got a real problem. I remember you saying to me that basically anything coming out of the Ivory Coast or Ghana for those companies just hasn't been properly monitored. It hasn't been properly traced.
Well, I think because tracing is very difficult, but traceability in itself is only important if there's results at the end of the traceable line, right? You can have great tracing ideas, great tracing initiatives, but if you're tracing it down to a farmer that's making 75 cents a day without doing any really remediation, without replacing those children with paid adult laborers, what good is traceability? Traceability is just a marketing word if there's not real change.
Yeah. And actually, when we talk about you being really strict with your list, we should mention Green and Blacks were thrown off as soon as they were bought by
Cadbury, yes, which was owned by Mondelez, because they will have different, they'll have different avenues to marketing dollars that you know, somebody, a small bean to bar company that is really, you know, working hard to keep their chocolate stream ethical won't have. So yes.
Mhm. And you do work in schools as well?
Well, slave-free chocolate, I take an interview from anybody. It can be a school, it could be Bloomberg News, it can be
You'll make time for them.
bloggers, it could be, yeah, podcasts, anything. It could be podcasters, it could be anybody. So, and school children, we need educators from all sectors, right? School children are, you know, very passionate. It's, you know, putting a seed into, you know, somebody that may one day become an activist on some subject. So that's all great.
I think it's really important stuff.
Yeah. And I think though, and basically, you know, as I said, nothing to date has done anything. And it's really, really important. My message is that we have to do whatever we can to pressure these big companies into coming, because if they don't come to the table, nothing is going to change for the better for these children. My partners, like I said, they include organizations, individuals, ethical chocolate companies. We're all working together, and the focus needs to bring them to the table. Slave-free chocolates partnership with the leadership of the Longshoremen and Warehouse Union. We'll have this as our focus going forward, and I think that's going to be extremely powerful.
Okay, that's great.
Thank you, Wren. And on that point, that personal
Oh, we're out of time.
point.
Okay. Brilliant. So I'd like now to skip ahead, please, and to speak to Juan and to Carl. Are you there? Juan and Carl? Hello?
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, we're here.
Hi,
everyone.
guys. So Juan and Carl, I'm really excited that you can join us, because I know that you understand actually the problem very, very well. And again, you can interrupt me if I'm misrepresenting you here. I know that you both actually run small ethical chocolate companies in Ecuador, and you pay, you know, well above market rates when you buy. But of course, you're very small, so the problem for your suppliers is you're not buying a lot, and also that your farmers are getting old. And it's almost, I should say to everybody here, it's incumbent upon all of us to make this work worth the while of farmers, or we're going to run out of anyone who's going to produce anything, basically. You know, if this isn't attractive to the next generation, then the whole thing grinds to a halt anyway. But what's really interesting to me is that from your own experiences as small ethical chocolate makers, you could see that there was a need for improved traceability, and you've come up with this fantastic app. Shall I just hand over to you and let you sort of run us through how it works?
Sure. Yeah, I would like to start with a quick introduction. So in my case, I co-founded TOAC, and we later started Origin just because after like dedicating some time to just getting our business together around the preservation of a cacao variety that was declared on the brink of extinction. Our colleague and co-founder is dedicated to rainforest preservation for 15 years now in Ecuador. So there was this relationship with cacao through the conservation project. And then he jumped over from nonprofit to see how he could make a living and also share a bit this relationship he had with cacao already. That's when the chocolate idea started, and we came together with my wife, who would be the third co-founder. And after some time, we just realized that, you know, as you said, we're really small. And the question was like, how could we increase our impact? Because on the one hand, yes, farmers were asking like, when you're going to buy more cacao, we have a bit more to offer. You're paying great prices. So that's that side of the business, which we are solving. But then the other side was also like, how could we, because we obviously as individuals and as a business, we are also aware of, you know, what's happening in the big picture of the industry. Although we are marginal, we have this extremely different business model and everything, but we still wanted to contribute to change. At least we were able to raise some questions. We got criticized and we got applause from the industry, everything. But you know, after some time, the question was like, what else could we do? And then things came together. So basically, we were already seeing our own like criticism rising about the certifiers that we were working with organic and fair trade. We were just drowned in bureaucracy.
Just underline that point as well. I know from all of you that you were very unhappy with the quality of monitoring going on with Rainforest Alliance and Fair Trade. As far as you were concerned, those labels were not helping.
Yeah, just to share an anecdote, our farmers were certified Rainforest Alliance when we started our project, and then when the relationship developed, we were asking like, you know, how is Rainforest Alliance doing? Because we started to look into certifications, and they said, well, we haven't seen anyone for like 3 years, but we're still certified. So then we started certification, but we were drowning in bureaucracy and paperwork especially. And we always thought like we could spend that money and time much better, and it could be so much more efficient because it was mostly my wife digging through papers instead of dedicating time to things we thought would contribute more value. And then we also as a business wanted to offer something beyond the label, because we always find it difficult to communicate what TOAC is all about, because press basically says we are the world's most expensive chocolate, full stop.
I think we use the headline as well. We're guilty.
Yeah. So we obviously were aware that there were these options of communicating through QR codes and then, you know, linking to digital stories and all these kind of things, which got more and more popular. And then our colleague who was involved with microfinance in an NGO in Asia, he had a friend and they worked with technology to deal with a corruption that happened with school books and trading in Cambodia. So she was happy to, she's our technology person at Origin, or head of technology. And, you know, there was the discussion around, so what could we do?
Actually, because I have to hurry you up, can you give us a little bit of a glimpse? Juan, are you going to share a screen and show us how it works?
Yeah, I'm happy to show you around, but instead of
Gavin's gonna cut us off, so let's have a quick look at what it is that Carl's talking about.
yeah, but so instead of confusing everybody, I'm gonna let Carl show the end product of what the
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Carl, do you want to share your screen, or I can share your story? You're on mute.
Yep, I'm gonna share my screen 1 second.
Okay, wonderful.
So I'm not quite sure what we're going to see, but I have walked through the back end of this, and it's a fascinating set of workflows that allow everybody at every stage to there's my email phone, to input loads and loads of data. So that's the front end there.
So yeah, that's the front end actually. It's a bit like the tip of the iceberg, to be honest. And so what we were interested in, as I told you, was the storytelling part. Like even about when we talk about criticizing fair trade, we realized that paying 10% above the market price, and in our case having the fair trade stamp on our product, doesn't tell the full story. In our case, we paid 200 to 700% above the market price. So we obviously needed something different to show people. And so this front end part is basically what is pulled up if you, whatever channel you use in currently the QR code got more popular thanks to the pandemic. So it could be scanning a QR code on your product or entering a numeric code on a simple URL that's linked to that product. And then you basically decide, besides having all the data that you decide to collect from your supply chain, you decide what you want to share with people to show, you know, what your product is all about, like what's your product story and what is interesting to consumers as well. So in our case, you show the product and then you can, you know, pull dynamic data from the system to say, okay, so this chocolate you're eating now, the cacao was harvested 214 days ago. So there's a part that's obviously marketing, which is pulling together images which are static, which you can decide as the one who is handling, let's say, front end. But then part of the system is critical data would be pulled from the chain, which is handled by the different actors in the supply chain. So you log in, for example, this is a prototype, by the way, it's a Google Earth Zoom, but you can basically log in the GPS coordination of where the transaction happened or the cacao was harvested, link it to data that validates like how many people or families are involved in that chocolate bar, how many harvests you did, and one of the critical topics like how much has been paid to farmers. And the idea is to then be able to have kind of, it's a bit inspired by Instagram, just to make it easy to digest for people. So at any point, or especially when you're at critical data points, offer people more information so that you then can pull up, for example, here, like beyond fair trade. Since the prototype, this part isn't finished, but you could pull up like, okay, so that sounds great, but show me some evidence, right? And then the idea is that you can pull up information from the transaction, for example. And there are many, we are discussing it currently, it's early stage, but obviously there are many different ways to validate a transaction. It could be the signature of a farmer. It could be just machine learning to help and understand and detect like flaws or things that are not or suspicious within transactions, etc. So yeah.
Well, maybe I can jump in now and really in 1 minute show you guys where this all came from. Like what's the back end? Gavin, if we got 1 minute.
Oh,
Is that fine? Thanks. All right. Thanks, Carl. I'm going to leave the presentation on the side, but just to explain, so sort of what Carl just showed is sort of the output of using the software, right? We're tracking all the nodes and data points of how the chocolate was made. So for example, we've built this workflow where you have the step-by-step of what the company is actually doing, right? In each step of the post-harvest process. The same for chocolate making. You can gather all the data in the step-by-step of the chocolate making, right? And then all this collection that can also be done, of course, offline with an app that is really lightweight, is then presented on also an admin dashboard, right? So on one hand, the B2C output is a beautiful storytelling that you just saw, but also B2B consumers or partners can probably just have a QR code on the Coco batches or on the big boxes of chocolate, and you can have a very simple report of where this chocolate lot came from or cocoa lot came from. So, and this is real data picked up from the field, from the actual conditions, right? And of course, right now we're working with chocolate companies that control the entire value chain. But the question is, when they don't control the entire value chain, how can we manage that an independent third party can gather this data, right? And so that it can be reliable. Now, just a very important note to wrap up. We're speaking all the way from Ecuador, and we've really focused our technology on sort of Latin American problems. Child slavery is not that big of an issue down here, very little actually, but we do see potential in this technology, of course, making more transparent the relationships also that occur in Africa. But we would have to consider, of course, that the relationships there are much more complex. Just to clarify that, because we're really focused right now in chocolate companies in Latin America. Yeah, thank you for the space.
So thanks so much for the reason I like this technology is that it's efficient and it works. So it's incredibly practical. But what I like at the consumer end is that with that kind of storytelling capacity, I think it helps the more expensive ethical brand actually compete in the supermarket at the point of purchase. And I think that that's what's really exciting. I do understand that things become a bit more complicated when the supply chains are different, as they are in Africa. But I still think that there's a lot of potential there. This is in beta, isn't it? So if there's anybody who's with us in the audience who's interested in having a go, they should contact you guys and make themselves known, shouldn't they? Brilliant. Thank you so much for that to both of you. And now, last but absolutely not least, we're going to speak to Dan Crossley, who's the Chief Executive of the UK Food Ethics Council. Dan, where are you?
Hi, Lise, how are you?
Hey, you're here. Hi, thank you so much for joining us. Dan, we have so much to discuss, but my first question is, why on earth is chocolate made by child slaves available to me to buy in the UK, in the supermarket? I mean, everywhere. We have regulation, we have laws in this country that I thought made that impossible. We actually have anti-slavery laws. How is this happening?
Well, hi everyone, and I should first of all say, really good, fascinating discussion. I'm not
easing you into this at all gently.
No, not at all, not at all. I should know, but genuinely, it's a fascinating discussion. I'm not a Coco expert. I'm not a kind of human rights expert. So I've been learning a lot from the voices in the room. And just to explain, I guess, put us in context very quickly. So we're a UK-based NGO, as you said. We're interested in how we can help play a part in unblocking some of the contentious ethical issues in the food sector, of which there are many. And this is one.
You do lobby very, very effectively, and you are very close to policymakers.
Yeah. So work. So yeah. So to your question. It's first of all, it's shocking that there is slave, and I wrote about this the other day. It's shocking that there is still slave-made food, including slave-made chocolate, and it's not the only sector, crucially, on our shelves. And I wish I had an answer for sort of why that's been allowed to happen. And I wish, you know, Humphrey's story and the work that Terry and others have been doing, I wish there hadn't been 20, 30 years of seemingly very little, if any, progress. I guess, I mean, certainly it's worth saying, you know, some of the legislation in the UK, like the Modern Slavery Act, is better than nothing. And, you know, but it's very much about, and again, I look to Terry and others will have the legal expertise rather than me, but it's my sense is that's about, you know, complying with transparency obligations and reporting certain things, as opposed to making it illegal to have forced labour and child labour. So we need to toughen up the legislation in countries like the UK and beyond. That's part of it. And we you know, and again, it's a cliche, but we have genuinely all got a role to play here. And the big, you know, big brands absolutely, we've heard, need to step up, and clearly have been, you know, saying for a long time they want to do things better. And from what we've heard, there's clearly nowhere near enough happening. And I guess, you know, on a more positive note, the pandemic's shown us that despite all the tragedy and horrific consequences of the pandemic, that there can be fast, urgent action can happen. So I guess, you know, if we really up the ante and put the pressure on, then we can make a difference. Just to add, to kind of build on that, I guess a couple of points from me, just reflecting on the discussion. Firstly, I think it's worth just reiterating that, and again, I know the audience know this if they're working in the sector, but chocolate can be a source of joy and pleasure, and chocolate can be produced fairly and in ways that are certainly better for people and better for planet. It's whilst, and that's not in any way underplaying the issue of slave labour, but just worth saying that clearly there can be more ethical companies and less ethical companies, is the first point. Second point is that there are, again, people on the call will be aware of this, but it's worth just zooming out briefly. Again, not underplaying the critical issue that we're talking about today, but worth thinking, you know, we think about ethical Easter eggs and ethical chocolate, then actually there's a whole bunch of other issues, really important issues that come into play about, you know, there's news out today about deforestation, and, you know, the average person in the West is responsible for 4 trees being chopped down, 4 rainforest trees being chopped down, some of that through cocoa, but a whole bunch of other stuff as well, stuff about palm oil, about over packaging, waste, obviously questions about obesity if people eat too much chocolate and other products like that. Animal welfare, we're talking about milk chocolate, and again, the list goes on, and this is not supposed to be a kind of paralyzing list or go, oh my God, how do we get our heads around that? But actually, we just need to think, try and think in the round and step back and go, what can be done? You know, it's going to need a combination of lawsuits. It's going to need much tougher legislation. It's going to need some of the more ethical brands, people supporting them much more. It's going to need a whole bunch of things. And again, I definitely don't have all the answers, and I'm keen to hear from those around the table. But from someone that's been working in the world of food sustainability for about 15 or more years, it just strikes me that this, we've had this drive for cheap food for the last few decades in the global north, the last 20, 30, 40 years. So it's not, sadly, not a surprise that we've got exploitation of people happening and continuing to happen across a whole bunch of sectors. So yeah, there's a lot more I could say about that, but I guess the point is, this is a critical issue amongst a number of other really critical issues. I don't have the answers for it. I wish I did, but let's also learn from what's. I don't think any sector would claim to be slave-free, but let's look at what's happened with. I love the work, for example, the Environmental Justice Foundation, the work they did in Thailand, exposing some of the forced labor and even murder happening in shrimp industry over in Thailand. So again, that hasn't gone away, but there's been significant improvements, as I understand it. Others will know better than me. So the point is, there is progress happening, but we clearly need to ramp that up.
Yeah, can I ask you, there have been noises made both in the States and by the EU about actually subsidizing chocolate companies in the Ivory Coast to help them I don't know, tackle child labor or something. It strikes me as the wrong kind of a conversation. Should taxpayers be subsidizing big business who have proactively, deliberately chosen to do the wrong thing? I just find it very interesting that the response we get from government is, let's give them some more money, let's give them some taxpayers' money, rather than let's just stop importing their products, which are in breach of our own legislation.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think certainly, I'm a fan of investing in, and again, it's not just about money, but investing and supporting and empowering people in areas in cocoa plantations and beyond. But to your point, yeah, should that be public funds and taxpayers' money from us? No, I don't think it should be. I think there in terms of direct support or certainly supporting those big companies that are working with them. So yeah, it's a really, really complex picture, clearly. But I guess the point is, we do need to, if we're going to continue buying chocolate in countries like UK and many of the other countries that we're in, we need to seriously think about how can we support and work with and empower people, the farmers, cocoa producers in country. And again, people around the table, including the audience, will have much better, more informed views than me on exactly how to do that. But the idea of supporting, kind of sort of subsidizing doesn't sit well. I think there is a case for investing and having kind of collective investment support for it that's really important. But also, if you come back to us as individuals for a minute, and I've been interested in the language that we talk about consumers, and I won't bang on about this because Gavin and others will have heard me say this lots before, but it is actually, if we think ourselves as consumers, for me, that's part of the problem, because we're sort of helpless, if you like, consumers at the end of a long, complex chain with all this stuff going on in cocoa chains and beyond, and we kind of feel as though we don't have any real role to play apart from what we buy, and crucially, what we buy, if we choose to buy certain brands, is really, really important, don't get me wrong. But actually, if we think of ourselves as, we talk about being food citizens, but as people, participants in the food system, then actually we can have much better chance of being able to influence. It's much more empowering. So, through activism, through how we vote, through, a whole bunch of ways, through if those that have investments and pensions, are they supporting, inverted commas, good or bad companies? So the point is, there's a whole bunch of ways we can influence and we can drive change that's beyond just, do we buy this bar of chocolate or that bar of chocolate?
That's a really interesting point, actually. It strikes me that the reason governments have no teeth when it comes to this problem is because they're not being held to account by voters. This is never something that you hear. That doesn't exist in a manifesto anywhere, for example. So I guess that what you're saying is we all have a duty as voters, as members of democracies, to hold our politicians to account on this. That's the other thing we can do aside from not buying this stuff.
Yeah, and we can, some people will have more time and inclination to get really active and do that, and other people can still have an influence but not be, you know, not be campaigning activists all the time. I think there's a role for, there's a kind of spectrum, but yeah, absolutely, there's a massive role for us as people, citizens of the planet, to influence and change things for the better, and to encourage others to, and again, it's very, again, this is not a light-hearted topic we're talking about today. It's an incredibly serious topic, rightly. But there is, I guess, one of the things I'm really keen to do is think about how can we look at what is working? What are there examples, even if it's pilots or something, that are working on the ground? And again, I look to people in the audience and the panel for that. And how can we build on that? That's sort of my motto at the moment. It's stolen from Cormac Russell. How can we build on what's strong, not what's wrong? And again, that's not saying we don't need to tackle what's wrong, but it's just kind of how can we build on what's positive, build that up, and at the same time, obviously, try and address these really, really serious challenges that are out there.
Okay, great. Is there anything else that the Food Ethics Council thinks that we should all be doing on this front? You've covered quite a lot of points there.
I mean, my main point would be I would, you know, listen to others, and let's have those conversations. Let's come together and let's bring the cocoa, the big chocolate companies around the table as quickly as possible. But let's hear from the audience. The audience has got a massive amount of expertise, more so than me, and I'm really, really keen to hear what their comments, questions are, and respond to those.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dan. I think we'll throw over to Gavin in a second to kick off with questions, and we seem to have a lot, which is brilliant. So thanks so much to everyone. I still have lots and lots of questions actually for all of you. Hopefully some people in the audience have the same questions, so we'll get to them and I'll stop talking at last. But I think it is worth mentioning that I think we have people with us, for example, from Divine, and I know that they have a great story to tell about the farms that they manage in Africa. So I think it's true, Dan, there are some good people doing great work, and that's really worth you know, mentioning and remembering, and for all of us to, you know, look out for that work and make sure that we're, you know, following suit, you know, wherever it might be relevant. So thank you so much to everyone. Gavin, where shall we start with questions?
Well, I'm going to quickly launch another poll. So there'll be another question that people can answer about whether governments should simply ban the import of slave-made chocolate, if that's the answer to this, or if that's not the answer. So that should be on your screens anytime now. And also, Humphrey, while you're still here, do you have a moment to take a question?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Okay, there was a question which I noted that you wanted to answer, which was about what is the real living wage and what should be the fair price paid to cocoa farmers?
Well, that's going back. Terrian people are probably more across that than I, but when I asked this question, when I last went there, the guy told me that he needed 3 or 4 times more than he was getting. And you could see that because you saw his mud hut, you saw his bicycle, you saw what he would, and when we talk about a living wage, we've got to think what makes us get up in the morning. We want to, you know, you want to have children and your grandchildren and that whole sense of the future. And he had nothing, it was flat. So it was 3 to 4 times, and I ran that through various inflation polls and the rest of it, and it sort of clocked up to what he was getting before the free market and democracy came into the Ivory Coast. I just want to say one thing, because I do have to, is that somebody was saying what would work. In Guatemala, with the sugar industry, they wanted to get European Union quotas in order to be allowed to sell sugar to the European Union. In order to do that, they had to get rid of child slavery, and they did. But the European Union is not strong enough, or there's too many lobby groups to bring that to bear against Cargill, Hershey, and whatever. But that's the sort of thing that would work. The other element that I quickly mentioned, I'm not sure if it's still in place, others would know, is that Africa, in West Africa, if you make chocolate there, you have a huge tariff, so it's not viable to import it. That's why the Cargills have got the grip on the market. You import the raw product, and it's made in European factories. So the whole of that Western sort of clamp on the thing is impoverishing Africa. It's not letting them make their own cocoa into chocolate. So they didn't know what chocolate tasted like. So if you gave them a bar of chocolate, they had no idea what they were eating, and actually they didn't like it very much.
That's
Yeah, that reminds me, I've heard the same story about coffee farmers in Colombia not knowing that their coffee is good coffee. But Terrence, would you like to add something about what is a fair price for cocoa?
Terrence might be on mute. No?
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep. I'm still very low tech even after a year of Zoom calls. I agree, roughly 3 to 5 times is the fair price. We actually have commissioned a study just now because we keep running into that problem, and I'm actually hoping that someday we're sitting at the table with the big cocoa companies and can throw out some reliable numbers of what really works. I think the most important point, though, is it almost is irrelevant to the companies if they all do it, that the amount of actual cocoa that is in a bar is a relatively small portion of the cost of manufacturing and more important, marketing and shipping the finished products. And that what we've experienced across the years is, as you mentioned, Lise, that if you talk to Cargill, they'll say, oh, well, if Nestle doesn't do it, we're not going to do it. And they keep pointing at each other. So it has to be across the board, which, as you mentioned, is one of the reasons we sued them all, to try to get everybody around the same table. But if you raise the price 3 to 5 times, it would not make a big difference to the consumers. And if the companies would stop paying lawyers, lobbyists, and PR firms to continue to have the right to use child slaves, they would recoup a whole bunch of money that could be devoted to paying the farmers a fair price.
Do you know, out of interest, how much a company like Mondelez or Cargill actually pay per kilogram?
I don't know that. Maybe someone else does.
I think per ton, they're paying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're paying around $1,200 per ton. The last numbers I heard last night was the living wage in the Ivory Coast should be about $2,750 per ton. And that's just baseline. That's not, that money wouldn't, a living wage doesn't mean that they're going to be able to build a school, which they should have had for, 30 years. It doesn't mean that they're going to have a medical clinic, which they should have had for 30 years. That's just basic. So they could just, earn a basic living. And that's not money that's going to be contributed back into the communities, which needs to happen if we're really going to end child labor in the industry.
And I think going back to Humphrey's, one of Humphrey's other points, actually, I know that all the ethical chocolate makers in our audience are almost obsessed with the fact that they make the chocolate very, very near where the chocolate's been harvested. So this idea of not being able to add value in country is a really serious problem. And again, it seems as though that could be solved overnight. It just means changing regulations.
Yeah, but you can't change the lobby groups. I mean, getting the EU to do anything is a bit like moving an elephant around a jungle, isn't it? So you can't do it. And also there is a very serious protectionist lobby. So how are you going to protect the jobs that make all that stuff in Bourneville or Hershey or the factories there, if you're then going to send them out to West Africa and Ivory Coast? And we all know that the blowback that's come from the jobs going to China and Asia and Trump and Brexit and everything like that. So you've got a serious political problem. The point though is that it's not being engaged with.
Yeah.
So yes,
They're
you could
talking about spending $1 billion in taxpayers' funds to rectify the child labour problem. €1 billion in Ivory Coast alone. That's the number being bandied about.
But of that billion, 90% would go into the pockets of corrupt politicians. So you've got a problem, and the only people that can bring those corrupt politicians into line are the chocolate companies, because the government exists on them being there. You're not going to do it with DFID or something going in and doing it, because they don't have the wherewithal to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Great. Gavin, any other questions?
Yeah, well, we've had a few questions about the presence of different schemes such as fair trade, Rainforest Alliance, etc. One comment suggested that a Reuters correspondent said that these certifications were the biggest scam of the century when they testified at the European Parliament. And the same correspondent also denounced the existence of a cartel of cocoa companies, and yet there are many panelists today defending the false fair trade certification and the false fair trade living income. And also, obviously, there's another suggestion that these are just greenwashes as well. Would anyone like to dive in on that point?
That sounds like something for Anne or Terrence, yeah.
I can answer that. I think the certification things are a great ideal, right? But they have been greenwashed. Rainforest Alliance was really started by Lipton and Chiquita Bananas. Oots, I believe one of the big complicit people are behind Oots. And so that's really just an example how self-regulation is not working. You can get your own auditing company to audit yourself. You know, they're going to get the business from you. That's why it has to be independent auditing companies doing this. And maybe there's a truly an independent certification program to do this. But the problem, maybe it's not in other commodities, but in cocoa, which is the only one I'm concerned about with my work right now, is it's too big of a problem to think that a certification program to come in. There's not money to bring these kids back to their parents in Mali. There's not money in a certification program to build a school. I think it's a great idea once everything's evened out, once everything's been remedied, going forward. Traceability programs like we have from Origin, that's really great, but that's not going to work right now in a deforested rainforest where there's no electricity. So we have to bring everything up to like a baseline, and then we can talk about how certification programs can help people going forward.
Yeah, and Terry, I know you want to dive in there, and I wonder if now is a good point to mention the free zones as well, which we haven't touched on yet.
Yes, in our recent complaint we filed on February 12th, we have a pretty big section in there that documents news reports and so on, but I will say unequivocally that Fair Trade and Rainforest Alliance are complete frauds. They are complicit with the companies in creating the false impression that they are somehow monitoring the child labor issue. They are not. It is not in their agenda. Their only thing they really claim to do is to ensure the premium price that they get for the cocoa farmers is paid to the cocoa farmers. They don't even do that right. I've interviewed so many cocoa farmers who said it got stolen, the cooperative leader made a deal, it's corrupt. It just doesn't work. The only thing that is working is that those organizations are filthy rich, taking money from the cocoa industry. So I hope I was as clear as possible on that.
Room for interpretation.
Lise, can I add to that? Because I think it's clear that certifications are not getting this problem out of the way, and it's not their responsibility, right? It's a company's responsibility to make sure that these things do not occur in their supply chain. And for that, a lot of things need to change. And that's exactly what we try to do by leading by example. And our 5 social principles try to point out just that. So we've talked about traceability, great example that Carl mentioned together with Juan. So that's the first step, right? Companies now just hide behind the anonymity of the international cocoa market. But with traceability, you have a direct link and you're tied to the problem. And then next to that, we talk about paying a higher price. That's also one of our social principles. Poverty is the root cause of all the problems in cocoa. If you want to fight poverty, you have to do many things, but paying more for cocoa is definitely one of the most important things. Then next to that, farmers are the weakest position in the power structure of the cocoa value chain. So you have to build organizations that strengthen them. Farmer groups or cooperatives that can represent their members to the international markets and also to their governments. We enter into multi-year contracts with those cooperatives so that they have a long-term horizon and that they have a guaranteed offset of the cocoa at a higher price. So that also allows them to look beyond just one season. And last but not least, especially in West Africa, different than in Latin America, productivity and the quality of farms is very, very low. There are old trees, there are old farmers, there's a lack of basically anything. So helping them to professionalize, become better cocoa farmers, become better farmers in general, can also contribute to enabling them to earn a living income. And all of these 5 things together is what we try to do and give an example of how to do that.
Would you guys consider switching suppliers? Would you consider switching out of Africa and maybe into Mexico, Ecuador?
Yeah, thanks for that. That's an excellent question. But as Terrence and other speakers pointed out, the big problem is in West Africa. Ivory Coast and Ghana combined export more than 2/3 of all cocoa worldwide. There are 1.5 million children documented that work illegally on those cocoa farms. More than 30,000 victims of modern slavery have been reported, and we think that's just an underestimation. The problem is there. If we want to solve the problem, we need to be there. That's why we purposefully source from Ivory Coast and Ghana. We want to be an example so that companies can no longer hide behind anonymity or behind this too complex of a value chain, or it's we also don't like child slaves on our chocolate, but we can't do anything about it. We prove that you can do something about it, that you can take responsibility as a company. We're not saying we're perfect. Every year, our value chain is growing. We started with just 100 tons or 100,000 kilograms of cocoa. This year, we're buying more than 10,000 tons. So with that expanding supply base, we get more problems into the supply chain all the time. And that is, in a way, a good thing, because with that direct connection to us, we can take responsibility for those problems. For the child labor cases that we still find, but that's just the top of the iceberg. Underneath that, we are trying to take away the underlying cause of all these problems, which is poverty. Helping farmers get to a living income should be the first step of creating change in the industry.
Lise, can I finish answering the question about the free zones real quick?
Yeah, sorry, we got distracted there.
Yes. One of the things I did is have some on-the-record interviews with the company cartel organizations. They really are a cartel. The World Cocoa Foundation, the International Cocoa Initiative are company-run cartels that speak jointly for all of the companies. In those interviews, everyone, if you ask the right questions and they're not liars, conceded that these new fancy programs the companies have announced, they realized that they can't keep saying Harkin Engel, so they made up these new programs, Nestle Cocoa Promise and the CMLRS system and all of this.
Why all this other language was suddenly being used. Right, okay, that's answered a question for me.
But the heads of these organizations conceded to me on the record, on tape, that those programs only cover 20%. One guy said maybe up to 30% of the supply chains, and that all of the other cocoa, either 70 or 80%, comes from what they all refer to as the free zones. Those are the plantations that are out there that no one even is tracking. Some of them are on national parkland that was deforested. So even the company's programs that they're bragging about are inherently misleading, because they only apply to a very small portion, and even within that small portion, they're not really doing what they say they're doing. But you have to be like obsessed like I am and spend days going through the fine print of their website so that you're able to then ask the right questions. But they are they're defrauding the public every single time they talk about this issue. I do want to quickly say that I think certification is possible. We need all the big companies to come in and do it together with an independent certifying entity of some sort. I think it needs to be created, because I don't believe any of the current ones could possibly do it honestly. I was one of the founders of a group called Rugmark that is now called Goodweave, that managed to set up an independent certification and monitoring system in the hand-knotted carpet industry of India. That was a terribly difficult job, because we had to find all the looms scattered all over India. Everyone had to get little motorcycles and drive all over India. It was kind of fun. But the cocoa industry is very concentrated geographically, that if they actually opened it up to us and allowed independent people to go in there and map it and then create a certification and monitoring system, it could be done. And who should pay for it? The companies that have been profiting from child slavery for years and years, decades. They can afford to fix the problem that they started and are profiting from.
When it comes to the free zones, though, even you won't go there, right? I mean,
Well,
these are
we did.
places.
No, we did visit free zones because they're so easy. We have visited all over the country. I also work with.
Well, I've got an image of guns and danger and, you know, this kind of being the Wild West in a no-go area, but it's not
Well,
quite.
that's Cote d'Ivoire anyways. I mean, you don't know which police you're going to run into that are corrupt or not corrupt, and you know, you just have to be ready for that. Humphrey mentioned Anja Boa, who is a Reuters reporter. He has been my guide and mentor in terms of where to go, and how to behave and so on. And he's kept us out of a lot of trouble. I did get arrested in Mali because we were gathering kids up and talking to them about trafficking at a bus station in Sikasso. The police came up and arrested me and my team, and I pointed out to the police where the traffickers were because my guys knew who they were, and they didn't even blink, and they took us away to the headquarters office to see if we'd pay them a bribe. I mean, that's how simple these things are, that the corruption is a problem that's going to be pervasive in solving the problem, but it can be done.
And I just wanted to touch quickly on the fact that, you know, when you're there with your assistants, it's simply a matter of trying out a couple of different languages to figure out whether or not this child is from here and should be here. It's actually really, really simple to do this, to figure this out.
Yes. I think that the number of children who are trafficked is grossly underestimated. In my anecdotal experience, it's pretty close to 50%. On first interview, in modern times, it's changed a lot, but on a first interview, almost every kid working will say he's 16 and his uncle owns the plantation. And then Anj Aboa and some other folks who were helping us, they can pick up the accent and say, no, you're not from here. And just 2 minutes of further interviewing and you find out, no, the kid's 12 and he came from Burkina Faso, he was trafficked, et cetera, et cetera. So I almost never hear on a first question, yes, I was trafficked, get me out of here. They have an overseer or the owner of the plantation has given them the stink eye while they're talking to us, but we figure out ways to get the kid alone and get to the truth. So I think all these canvassers and surveyors, and particularly people being paid by the Coco companies, they're just walking up and saying, how old are you, where you're from? They take that first answer and move on, but it takes a little bit of work to get the truth in all areas.
Okay. And again, just very quickly, I wanted to check with you about the fact that in terms of the existing monitoring, actually there is monitoring going on in terms of illegal deforestation. That's obviously very important. And there is some great work being done by eco-activists, but there is actually no formal monitoring process on the subject of child labor and child slavery, is there? I mean,
no, there's not. Absolutely.
Monitoring for this at all, which beggars belief.
That's correct. And to the extent that Nestle hired the Fair Labor Association to do some overall monitoring, they're only doing it on about 20% of the farms, and they really won't tell us the truth of what they did find, whether or not they properly interviewed kids and then what happens to them. But the Fair Labor Association, the head of their office in Cote d'Ivoire, was one of the people that admitted to me they don't really dig down when a kid says it's his uncle. They pretty much move on, and they don't have time to spend with each kid to find out the truth.
And we are talking hundreds of thousands. Actually, it's about 100,000 laborers, and about half of those you think are trafficked.
There's the NORCA report that came out in October said there's 1.58 million children performing labor on these plantations, and 95% of those are doing the worst forms of child labor. They specifically claim that they did not look for the distinction with forced labor or trafficked labor, and merely were observing the kinds of labor. I don't know why they didn't, but in my anecdotal experience, it's about half of the kids that are from Mali and Burkina Faso.
Right. So in terms,
I'm going to jump in quickly. It'd be really good just to move on to another question, because I think this really leads on from what Terrence has just been saying, which is asking Anne about the methodology behind the slave-free chocolate list and what are the standards that companies are being held to, and where can they be found?
Oh, okay, for the slave-free chocolate list, basically it's a testament. When I talk to the chocolate companies, you know, I ask where they get their beans, you know, what is their supply chain, and then I just attest. Are you telling me the truth that there is no, you're not partnering with a bad actor? You know, this is how your chocolate's being made. And then, you know, if they attest that this is true, then they can be put on the list after I've done my research. But no, I don't go to every single chocolate company, go out to Peru or something like that. They would take hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then also the list is, you know, slave-free chocolate, the list is just one part of our program. You know, it's a program that, you know, touches the consumers the most, but it's really just one part of what we do. And the list is to provide an action item for people who want to do something. They want to vote with their dollar. They want to, you know, make good choices. That's what the list is for. And the other part of the list is that these ethical chocolate companies, I consider to be on a team to go above and beyond what they're already doing. Like I said, I'm worried. I don't want to see that we are growing a slave-free industry right next to a slave industry, and we get so complacent about the word slave that we don't even think about it anymore. That, you know, I also ask these companies to go above and beyond and do education to places that may never buy their chocolate bars.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's really useful. And just to quickly link that back to Tony's as well. Tony's, are you, did Barry Callebaut make all of your chocolate?
Yeah, so we source our chocolate independent from Callebaut. So we have direct links with our partner cooperatives and also the domestic traders, and you know, we go through the same government agencies as all the chocolate comes from Ivory Coast and Ghana. There's a factory of Barry Callebaut in Antwerp. They made several investments in that factory, that plant, to process that cocoa separate from the rest of it. And they make the chocolate that we sell in our chocolate bars. Yeah, and that's, you know, also to an earlier point that was mentioned. So we've been talking about these problems of labor exploitation, illegal child labor, modern slavery in cocoa for more than 2 decades. And as Anne rightly pointed out, despite all the activism, despite all the things that all of us here around have done, nothing much has changed. There's still 1.5 million children working, tens of thousands of victims of modern slavery. So we need to figure out how to put so much pressure on big chocolate companies that they are actually going to change. And I think we need 3 things for that. So one is pressure from Terry and a few other good men and women that do that, to really use whatever legislation there is to force them to change. I think we need more legislation, and that's why we've also started a petition. But legislation is one part. The second part is we need consumers to not only, you know, make a conscious decision in the supermarket, but also, you know, think about these things when they vote, our governments, and you know, other things that they can be activists for change. And third, I think we need a credible model that takes away any argument of big chocolate companies that they cannot do differently, like the immunity argument that they raised, that they dared to raise on the 1st of December in the US Supreme Court. We can stop this right now. We can stop tomorrow. There's so much money in this industry that cannot be the problem. We've already demonstrated that there is no longer an excuse to hide behind the anonymity of the international commodity trade, because you can have traceability even from these large commodity markets. So our model is designed and therefore purposefully working with one of the biggest cocoa grinders in the world, Barry Callebaut, so that we're not set aside as a niche product or, you know, a nice model for small ethical chocolate brands. Our model is the blueprint, we think, for the entire industry to really bring about change.
So I guess the question also that needs to be asked, though, but is Tony's doing something about getting back onto the slave-free chocolate list for next year?
You guys are talking, right, Anne and Paul?
Yes,
Yeah, so-
yes,
so
absolutely.
I called Anne after she decided to not have us on the list anymore, and you know, the big media attention that got, and you know, Anne and I, we realized that we are actually fighting the same battle. We are not competing with the chocolate companies that are on the list, like Toak. They're great bean to bar chocolate companies that have direct sourcing, that do absolutely good work. We believe that our model for changing mass chocolate sector, buying cocoa from Ivory Coast and Ghana in a different way that actually can change the system, is the way to change the norm in the industry and really bring about large-scale change. And I think Anne and I, you know, concluded that we both are horrified by the fact there are still so many children working. There's so many problems are still there, even after 20 years of activism and working on this. And you know, we need all of us around here to join and unite to really increase pressure on these big chocolate giants that really hold the key. It's their choice to you know, make excess profits, enormous profits, at the expense of extreme human rights violations in the beginning of the value chain.
I think that's also a good point, actually. There's been a question, a rather eloquent question that brings everyone together, and it's kind of a bit more forward-looking as well. And so I'll read it out. And the question says, may I ask who the audience is that is watching this panel discussion? If it's primarily people like myself who are activists and ethical chocolate makers, all of what you've said so far to us is not news. And most of us are fighting alongside you, so you're not alone in this. We're those little voices within our markets trying to spread the message about all of this. Will anyone in the panel have news about what is genuine news on these issues? And how do we keep this battle in the courts from simply becoming a bleak house tale of generational lawsuits that aren't actually fixing the problem? So I think this question is asking about looking to the future and what we can, you know, what can be changed or what actions can be taken to, you know, to build better in the future. And would anyone on the panel like to jump in on that? Terrence?
Dan, jump in as well at some point.
I'll be brief, thank you. Our case that is in the Supreme Court is now 16 years old. So yeah, there's sort of a bleak house quality to it, but I guess I take issue with sort of the cynicism that's implied in the question that we are doing everything possible legally that you can do right now with existing laws to hold companies accountable. The news, or the new news, will be, I hope I can tell you all in May that we won in the Supreme Court and that our new trafficking case is accepted so that we can get discovery from the companies. I mean, that's how we make progress. I want to emphasize that our new trafficking case is under a new law, never been tried in this scale of a supply chain, but the law is perfect for it. And step one, if the court agrees we've stated a claim, we get discovery. In American legal systems, discovery means I get all of their documents, all of their supply chain information. I get to put their CEOs in my office and I take their depositions under oath. That's a victory. I'll retire happy if we get to that stage, because that will be a terrific thing. I also want to just quickly remind that we have a statute that allows us to petition to ban the importation of cocoa or any other product made with forced labor. We filed such a petition a year ago, February 14th, 2020, with all of our evidence. We believe that it sat idle during the Trump administration, but we've now re-engaged with the new people over there, and we think that that has some legs too. If we win that, every company that imports cocoa into the United States will have to demonstrate that their particular cocoa is not made with forced labor. That's the goal of this, that it'll require them to have a certification system. We have 2 cases pending in California under the consumer laws. We allege that Nestle, Mars, and Starbucks are affirmatively misrepresenting that they don't use child labor. So we're using every law there is, and the only news you'll hear is when we either win or lose. And if we lose, the only good news would be that it gives us ammunition to say we need to change the law. And there is a group of us working together. We have 3 proposals to improve the law. And if we get our turn in line, we're going to improve the law. It'd be so easy to fix the laws to make them better. And as I think several people mentioned, the political will issue is a tough one, but it's hard to really get someone alone and have them tell you that you're in favor of child slavery. I don't think there's going to be a lot of that. I'll stop.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It does beg a belief. I think that's one for Dan to come in on as well, actually. And Dan, I mean, I know it's stating the obvious, but the other thing is for people to literally just stop buying these products today. I mean, as soon as there's no money in this, it goes away, surely. But Dan,
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll have something more.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, there's lots of different, I mean, again, I wish there was one simple answer. You know, people talk about boycotts or conversely boycotts in terms of supporting those that are doing better things, and that's absolutely part of it. But I think there's also, you know, we kind of step back from this again. I keep saying that, but like it has to be a collective mission. Hence, you know, I genuinely admire the work, the sort of mission that Tony's has got. And you know, it's not a perfect company. They're not doing everything right, but I guess I'd support their sort of mission of what they're trying to do, but also support those you know, ethical chocolate companies that are in the audience, and you know, Tarak and others who are doing some amazing things. So I guess it's that, you know, I come at this from, I completely respect people will have very, very strong views on this, which I completely understand. But I guess I come from the perspective, how can we be constructive? How can we, we're in this situation now, which is, as we said, hasn't improved, or has, how can we solve it? How can we address it? There's not going to be a simple answer, but first and foremost, it's, you know, I'm not going to come here and pretend I've got the answers, but it's kind of, I guess the first thing I say is me to talk to cocoa farmers, hear from them what's stopping, what's causing this, and then, you know, and build from there, rather than me sitting in my ivory tower or my, you know, up here in the UK, kind of saying, oh, I think the answer to what's going on over, you know, in Sierra Leone or wherever is X, Y, Z. I know I don't want to impose my own views on that. But yeah, so so again, not an answer, but we need to talk to cocoa farmers, genuinely listen to them, hear what the conditions are for them, and see what can be done to support them. And it's not, back to this previous discussion. I'm not here as an apologist for certification schemes or for big business or for anyone. We're an independent organisation, but I guess I would say that there are lots of people in those organisations who are passionate about changing things as well. So there are kind of internal advocates often within big business that can be worked with sometimes. But there's also the certification schemes, you know, the likes of Rainforest Fair Trade Alliance. I think they themselves, I suspect if they're here, would say they're not perfect. I guess they come with good intent. My sense is that they have overall had, you know, made some positive impacts, but they were sort of, certification schemes were set up, you know, 20 years or more ago, and in a particular time, and the world has moved on in lots of ways, so they need to move and evolve, and I absolutely support the need for independence in this. So we need scrutiny of those as well as scrutiny of big business. But yeah, I guess the overall message is, yeah, let's listen to the people that are making, you know, are working on plantations, and understand their perspectives, rather than sort of imposing solutions from, you know, many hundred miles or thousands of miles away.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, and I do hear you on the point that, you know, being a former CSR worker for, you know, big listed FTSE 100 companies myself, of course, I will sort of say it's the industry is full of people with good intentions. And I think from somebody with that background, such as myself, we look at what Terrence is doing, which is taking this to the heart of the decision makers. So our bosses, the people who sign our checks. And that's very exciting to see that somebody is coming at this from another angle, who can, you know, overcome some of the problems that in a highly structured, hierarchical corporation, the person sitting in CSR next to the pot plant is really unable to unpack. So we do our little bit, but of course we're unable to change how much that company worked for is going to pay for the cocoa. So sadly, it is really sad that what it gets down to is the fact that unless you're being sued, the law is kind of meaningless.
Yeah, I don't know if that's for me or not, but yeah. I mean, it's a very complex. Others will be better positioned than me on that.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we're actually coming to the end. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so Lise, do you have any burning questions to jump in at the end?
No, I feel as though I've done way too much talking, and I'm so sorry to everybody you've been lumbered with listening for me for too long. I hope that everybody feels that we had enough time for each of you. Anne, is there anything you'd like to sort of take us out with at the end of all of this?
Oh, thank you. I guess sort of the things I want people to remember, that really nothing's going to change until we can get big chocolate to the table. We could have, my list could be 50 times bigger. There could be 5 Tonys, working in the industry, but unless we can figure out how to get them to the table, wish me luck with the partnership with United Longshoremen Warehouse Union. That's a very big, powerful union. Nothing's going to change for the better. So I think there are some great ideas once this is done, but everything, I hope to work together with everybody on what do we need to do to get these people to the table.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Paul, was there anything else you wanted to just squeeze in before we have to go?
Just had a couple of thoughts on your previous question, how to look to the future. And it's, after 20 years, we need to be careful, like Terry said, to not become cynical. The problem is still there. It's usually big, but I do see things changing. One of the most important things that I really see momentum, that the time of voluntary actions is getting quickly behind us. So legal pressure on chocolate companies, again, together with a new way of working, gives me a positive feeling. There's so many things that develop. We basically know what we should do to change it, and making sure that's no longer an option for companies to choose profit over human rights violations. That's the way to go.
Brilliant, thank you. And Juancho and Carl, I hope that you've put your details in the chat, because I'm sure that there are people who joined us who would be great for your beta exercise. But is there anything else you wanted to say before we all go?
Yeah, I've reached out on the chat. I want to thank you all for inviting us and for sharing your thoughts. This has given us a lot of food for thought in terms of how our software could be adapted and actually be a game changer, not only for Latin America and countries that are similar to Ecuador, but in Africa and other regions as well. So we look forward to seeing your faces again in some other spaces. And yeah, thanks again, Lise and Gavin.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks so much, guys.
I also
Dan.
wanted to say thanks to everyone.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm personally humbled by everything many of you are doing for the industry. And I hope that through Origin, we can contribute a bit. One of the parts that excites me the most, I would like to see take off, is to be able to break the barrier between the supermarket shelf and the label and the actual people behind it. So ideas like being able to dip a farmer, for example, just connect with the farmer and getting a bit closer to the origin and the actual people behind it could also have an effect on people to just, know that you're part of a chain of something that's connected, and yeah, there are real people behind it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We all know, all of our friends are the sorts of people who, if they could, would actually pay a lot more than the asking price for a product if they knew that it was going straight to the farmer. And that kind of technology would be absolutely groundbreaking. And I genuinely believe that, if I was at a supermarket shelf and I had the option of something cheap, or the option of something ethical, which allowed me to make that tip to the farmer, I absolutely know what my choice would be. And I think everybody here knows that everybody they know would make that same choice. It's a really good point. Thank you. Thank you. And Dan, did we give you enough airtime?
Plenty. I guess just a final quick couple of thoughts very quickly. Firstly, it's clear there's a lack of teeth, and pardon the pun, as in, people talk about eating too much chocolate, lack of teeth, but more seriously, in terms of there needs to be more teeth in terms of, if we haven't seen this progress, there needs to be, we need urgent action, and big companies, as I said, need to up their game really, really quickly. We haven't got 10, 20 years to wait. I don't want to come back in 10 years time to this discussion and hear there's been no progress. But we can all, we can all ask questions, we can all scrutinize, we can all challenge, we can all work with others on this and genuinely, make progress. And I guess, tell someone about it. If you've learned something today, or if you've, then do tell people, do ask questions, do encourage people to make change. And final thing, I guess there's another, lots of important parts of this subject. We've sort of scratched the surface and it's been learned a lot. I guess what I'd say is there's also the part of the equation, we think about ethical chocolate probably costs more if people are being rewarded fairly along the chain, which it in most cases it probably will. So we also need to think about how do we empower everyone to be able to have access to good chocolate and good healthy a good healthy diet more broadly, obviously chocolate in moderation. So it's kind of how can we make sure that there is a proper functioning safety net in countries like UK, that people are paid a real living wage in the UK as well as in the countries we're sourcing from, so that everyone can participate. I'll stop there, but thank you.
That makes a lot of sense to me, because what I didn't give you time to talk about, of course, is that the parallel, policy requirements that make this work. So, of course, we've been talking today on a lot of assumptions. We're all professionals here, but the sorts of work that you get involved in includes anti-obesity campaigns, for example. So yes, people should be eating less chocolate. They shouldn't be eating bad, cheap chocolate really on a regular basis anyway. So I think, we're operating on the assumption that in an ideal world, people are paying a little bit more for healthier chocolate and eating, less of it.
But I guess what I would say is I wouldn't be judging people for choosing. Lots of people can't afford to buy at the moment the ethical option, so we need to be careful about judging people. But what I want is for us to walk in the range of chocolates that people have, and a whole bunch of fruit and veg and other stuff as well. If you walk into a cafe, walk into a supermarket, or wherever you get your food from, you're provided with a better set of options, so that those it's not a choice of, do you want this slave-free chocolate, or do you want this chocolate that might be made by slave labor? You want to walk in and know and be able to trust those brands. So there's big power that the retailers and big food service companies have got in this as well. It's not just the manufacturers. There's power that they can transmit down the chain as well.
Great, thank you. And Terry, we're going to have to wrap up, but we have to give you the final word.
Well, thank you. I will summarize that I think both Anne and Paul have created the right models for what we all need to do. That is enforce the laws, have better consumers who are pressuring the companies, and have more good companies. And that our goal is to get the big companies to the table. I always tell them that. They think I'm a normal lawyer who's trying to make money or something. I wouldn't have done this for 15 years if that were the motivation. We want to get the companies to the table, and any legal victory that we have should accomplish that. And I think that'll be the news. And last, I want to plug Mickey Mastrati's new film.
Yes,
he's made two films already, The Dark Side of Chocolate, and I think the other one is Bitter Chocolate. But he's making a new movie that'll be out this year called The Chocolate War. And he really takes a long range of look at what we've all been trying to do. He does focus on our cases, and he does this brilliant juxtaposition between what the companies are arguing in court and the reality of the ground. So keep an eye out for that film. And I think it's going to do a lot to get the companies to the table, because we name names and have the evidence all wrapped up beautifully in this film. That's it. Thank you for everyone for listening and for this opportunity to have a civilized discussion. We've shown we can do it.
Thanks so much, everyone.